The lights inside Fairlane glow long after midnight. This house is not resting. It is monitoring, regulating, controlling comfort with the same precision used on a factory floor. Every room reflects command, order, and absolute certainty. Beyond the gates, before dawn, thousands of men rise to the sound of whistles and steel. Their labor feeds the systems that power this estate. Henry Ford built this world with unmatched speed and discipline, shaping modern industry while shaping lives just as tightly. Fairlane stands as proof of success, but also as evidence of a deeper contradiction. Luxury here is not separate from control, it is built directly on it. The story begins long before Fairlane rises above the riverbank. It starts in workshops that smell of oil and hot metal, in narrow spaces where machines shake the floor, and time is measured by output rather than daylight. Henry Ford does not appear as a symbol at first. He appears as a man focused on motion, on how parts fit together, on how minutes can be reduced to seconds. His early years are defined by repetition and observation. He watches belts turn, gears catch, and human hands struggle to keep pace. From the beginning, efficiency is not just a goal, it is a belief. By the early 1900s, Detroit is transforming into a city of sound. Hammers ring from every direction. Furnaces glow through the night, and rail lines carry steel inward while finished products roll outward. Ford Motor Company grows inside this environment like a living engine. Each year brings more workers, larger buildings, and tighter systems. The idea of mass production moves from theory into practice. Instead of craftsmen shaping one object from start to finish, labor is broken into narrow tasks. One motion repeated thousands of times a day becomes the foundation of modern industry. The moving assembly line changes everything. Cars that once took many hours to build now roll out in minutes. Costs drop, volume rises, and Ford's influence spreads far beyond Michigan. Newspapers describe him as a genius, a reformer, a man reshaping the future. Wealth accumulates rapidly, faster than most people can imagine. Profits no longer arrive in small steps, they arrive in waves. With them comes power, and with power comes distance. As factories expand, Ford begins to separate himself from the environments that created his fortune. He no longer walks shop floors daily or listens to machines struggle. Instead, he oversees systems from above, reading numbers, studying flow, refining control. This distance is not accidental. It is part of the same logic that built the assembly line. Complexity is managed by hierarchy. Movement is guided from a central point. At the same time, Ford develops a deep interest in order beyond machines. He believes social behavior can be regulated just as production can. Stability, in his view, depends on discipline. Workers are not only producers of value, they are components within a larger system. Their habits, homes, and private lives become matters of concern. Efficiency, he believes, must extend beyond the factory gate. The famous $5 day brings global attention. Wages double overnight, and workers rush to join Ford's plants. From the outside, it appears generous and progressive. Inside the system, it comes with conditions. Inspectors visit homes. Drinking habits are noted. Family structures are evaluated. Personal behavior becomes part of employment. The paycheck is tied to compliance. Order is rewarded. Deviation is corrected or removed. This philosophy shapes every decision that follows. As profits continue to rise, Ford looks for a place to withdraw from the noise while maintaining control. He does not want a simple residence. He wants an environment that reflects his ideals. The house must be modern, efficient, self-contained, and insulated from disorder. It must demonstrate what controlled progress looks like when applied to living space. The land chosen lies along the Rouge River, not far from the factories but far enough to feel separate. The location allows privacy without isolation. Water flows steadily, a natural counterpart to mechanical motion. The ground is cleared, surveyed, and reshaped. Construction begins with careful planning. This is not a mansion built on impulse. It is designed as a system. Fairlane rises gradually, its structure solid and deliberate. Stone and brick form walls meant to last generations. Inside, rooms are arranged with purpose. Heat is distributed evenly. Electricity flows quietly through concealed lines. Water is filtered, redirected, and reused. Every feature serves a function. Comfort is engineered rather than decorative. While construction advances, the factories continue to grow. Workers stream in daily, their routines fixed by bells and clocks. The contrast between spaces becomes sharper. Inside Fairlane, silence dominates. Outside, noise defines existence. The same wealth funds both worlds, yet they feel entirely separate. The division is physical, emotional, and symbolic. Ford's presence at the estate reflects this divide. When he arrives, the atmosphere shifts. Staff move efficiently, anticipating needs before they are spoken. Schedules are precise. Nothing is left to chance. The estate operates like a factory without visible strain. Order appears effortless, but only because every detail has been planned and enforced. From the windows, the river appears calm. Trees line its banks, carefully maintained. Nature is not left wild here. It is shaped to fit the vision of balance and control. Paths are placed where walking should occur. Views are framed to emphasize harmony. The environment reinforces the idea that chaos can be managed through design. Beyond the estate, life follows a different rhythm. Tenements fill with workers and families drawn by steady wages. Streets are crowded, noisy, and unpredictable. Long shifts leave bodies exhausted. Injuries are common. Turnover remains high despite pay incentives. The system produces cars efficiently, but it consumes people quickly. Ford is aware of these conditions, but he views them through a lens of necessity. Progress requires sacrifice. Discipline requires enforcement. In his mind, the alternative is disorder, inefficiency, and decline. The mansion becomes a place where these beliefs feel justified. Surrounded by stability, it is easy to believe the system works. Fairlane is completed as Ford's power reaches its early peak. It stands as a monument not only to wealth, but to confidence. Every wall, pipe, and wire reflects the idea that the world can be organized if the right rules are applied. The estate does not simply shelter its owner, it broadcasts his worldview. Visitors are impressed by the technology and scale. They speak of innovation and foresight. Few mention the labor that made it possible. Fewer still connect the comfort inside the mansion to the control outside it. Yet the connection is constant. Each improvement in living space mirrors a demand placed elsewhere. At night, when the factories slow and the city dims, Fairlane remains steady. Lights glow evenly, heat stays constant, water flows on command. The house does not sleep because the system behind it does not rest. It is sustained by continuous production, continuous oversight, and continuous compliance. This is the foundation of Ford's mansion world. It is built on belief as much as material. Belief in efficiency. Belief in control. Belief that order justifies authority. The house is the physical expression of these ideas, but it is not isolated from their consequences. Those consequences are already forming, just beyond the gates. The contrast becomes impossible to ignore. One world is quiet, controlled, and secure. The other is loud, strained, and watched. They are connected by wealth, by labor, and by ideology. Fairlane stands complete, but the system that built it is still expanding. Fairlane does not feel like a traditional mansion once it is fully occupied. It feels more like a carefully managed machine designed for living. Every system inside the house responds smoothly, quietly, and without delay. Lights turn on instantly. Rooms stay warm in winter and cool in summer. Water pressure never drops. There is no sense of struggle, no visible effort. Comfort appears automatic, but it is the result of planning, testing, and constant attention. By the late 1910s, this level of domestic technology is rare even in major cities. Most homes still rely on coal fires, manual labor, and simple wiring. At Fairlane, heat moves through hidden channels. Electricity powers appliances that reduce human effort. Elevators remove the need for stairs. Kitchens function with the same logic as factory stations. Tasks are simplified, movements reduced, time saved. The house reflects the same principles that guide Ford's factories. Only here they serve one family rather than thousands of customers. The estate grounds follow the same pattern. Lawns are trimmed with precision. Trees are placed deliberately rather than left to chance. Paths curve gently, guiding movement without drawing attention to the control behind them. Even nature is organized to feel calm and predictable. Nothing feels accidental. Disorder is absent by design. For Ford, this environment is proof of concept. It shows that efficiency does not have to feel harsh. When applied correctly, it can feel smooth, even comforting. Inside Fairlane, his belief system feels complete. The noise, danger, and pressure of industry are kept at a distance. What remains is a controlled world where outcomes can be anticipated and adjusted. At the same time, the factories continue to push forward at full speed. Production numbers climb year after year. New plants expand along the Rouge complex. Steel arrives in massive quantities, and finished vehicles leave in endless lines. The scale is unlike anything seen before. Workers become part of a rhythm that never fully stops. Shifts rotate, machines run day and night. Efficiency is no longer a goal, it is an expectation. This contrast grows sharper as Fair Lane becomes more refined. Inside the house, time feels slow and flexible. Meals arrive when expected. Sleep is uninterrupted. Quiet dominates the space. Outside the estate, time is rigid. Bells dictate movement, clocks define value. Minutes lost mean wages lost. The same system that creates ease in one place creates pressure in another. Ford remains convinced that this balance is necessary. He believes modern life requires structure. Freedom without limits, in his view, leads to waste and instability. The house reinforces this idea daily. Everything works because rules are followed. Systems are respected. Deviations are corrected before they cause damage. Visitors often leave Fair Lane impressed rather than uneasy. They see innovation, foresight, and modern thinking. Many admire the way technology improves daily life. Few ask how such comfort is sustained. Fewer still consider the human cost beyond the gates. The mansion directs attention inward, toward achievement, rather than outward, toward consequence. Inside the Ford organization, oversight becomes more formal during this period. The sociological department grows in influence. Inspectors expand their reach. Homes are visited more often. Cleanliness, spending habits, and family behavior are recorded. The idea is to stabilize the workforce by stabilizing private life. Order at home is believed to support order at work. Workers experience this oversight differently. For some, higher wages make the intrusion tolerable. For others, it feels invasive and humiliating. The factory no longer ends at the gate, it follows them home. Their personal choices become visible to management. Compliance becomes a condition of stability. This system mirrors the design of Fair Lane itself. Nothing is left unobserved. Nothing operates without oversight. Comfort exists because control is constant. The house is not simply a retreat from industry. It is an extension of its logic. As the 1920s approach, Ford's reputation reaches its height. He is seen as a symbol of American progress. Politicians seek his approval. Journalists praise his vision. The mansion becomes a quiet backdrop to this public image. It does not appear in headlines often, but it reinforces his authority. It signals permanence, success, and confidence. Yet beneath the surface, tension grows. Labor demands increase as production intensifies. Repetition wears bodies down. Injuries accumulate. The pace of work leaves little room for recovery. While wages remain high by industry standards, the cost is measured in exhaustion and loss of autonomy. Ford resists outside interference. He distrusts unions, regulators, and critics. He believes they threaten efficiency and order. From Fair Lane, it is easy to see the world as something that needs correction, rather than negotiation. The calm inside the house sharpens the contrast with the unrest outside. The estate continues to evolve with new improvements. Technology is updated. Systems are refined. Nothing remains static. This constant adjustment reinforces the idea that progress must be managed actively. Left alone, systems decay, people drift. Control must be maintained. Meanwhile, workers begin to share experiences. Complaints circulate quietly at first. Stories of inspections, discipline, and pressure spread. The sense of being watched creates anxiety. Trust erodes. What was once seen as guidance begins to feel like surveillance. Fair Lane remains insulated from this shift in mood. The house absorbs stress rather than reflecting it. Its walls block noise. Its routines remain unchanged. Meals are served on time. Lights glow steadily. Comfort continues without interruption. This insulation creates distance not only physically, but emotionally. Decision-making becomes abstract. Problems are viewed as numbers, trends, and behaviors, rather than lived experiences. The mansion supports this detachment. It offers clarity without friction. The house stands fully realized as a symbol of modern living. It demonstrates what technology and discipline can achieve when applied without resistance. But beyond the estate, resistance is beginning to take shape. The same systems that create harmony inside Fair Lane are creating pressure elsewhere. That pressure is building, slowly but steadily. preparing the ground for open conflict that will challenge the very foundations of Ford's controlled world. By the early 1920s, Ford Motor Company looks like a finished machine when seen from the top. The numbers keep moving in the right direction, cars keep rolling out, and the public story sounds clean and confident. From the quiet order of Fair Lane and from offices where charts and schedules replace noise, the system appears almost perfect. It seems to prove that discipline can solve any problem if it is applied hard enough and long enough. Yet the closer the camera moves to the factory floor, the more the dream begins to show strain. Inside the plants, time is not a background detail, it is the main character. It controls when bodies stand, when hands move, when eyes blink, and when breath becomes shallow. The line sets a pace that cannot care about sickness or fatigue. A worker does not decide when to speed up or slow down. The conveyor decides. The day becomes a chain of repeated motions that must fit into a moving stream of steel. The work is divided until it becomes almost invisible as craft. One person tightens the same bolts, another places the same part, another checks the same edge, again and again. The task is simple on paper, but repetition makes it heavy. The hands learn the movement so well that the mind can drift, yet drifting creates mistakes. A mistake can cause a stoppage, and a stoppage draws attention. Attention brings supervisors, and supervisors bring pressure. The sounds are constant and sharp. Metal clinks against metal, tools bite into surfaces, and the line produces a steady hum that never fully fades. Shouts cut through the air when something goes wrong, and whistles mark boundaries like commands. Even when the shift ends, the noise stays in the ears. Many workers leave the gate and still feel the vibration in their bones, as if the floor is still moving under their feet. Physical strain arrives first, then it becomes emotional strain. Arms ache from lifting and twisting. Fingers stiffen from fastening parts at the same angle all day. Legs lock up from standing in one spot, and shoulders tighten from leaning forward under pressure. Minor injuries become common: cuts, bruises, burns, and smashed fingertips. Some workers develop pain that never fully disappears. It becomes part of the body's normal state. Ford's system is designed to reduce wasted motion, but it also reduces recovery. Short breaks feel like a pause that ends before breathing returns to normal. Lunch can feel rushed, swallowed quickly because the mind never stops tracking time. The return to the line feels like stepping back into a current that does not slow for anyone. Over weeks and months, the body learns to endure, but endurance is not the same as health. Many workers try to manage the strain with small private strategies. Some wrap cloth around sore areas under their shirts. Some carry homemade salves for blisters and cracked skin. Some learn to shift weight from foot to foot in ways that do not draw attention. These tricks do not fix the problem. They only help a person survive the day. Survival becomes the goal more often than pride in the work. Ford sees the process differently. He believes repetition builds skill and focus, and that focus builds a stronger worker. He believes modern life is not meant to be soft, it is meant to be productive. In his mind, the discomfort is a stage, and the reward is stability and higher pay. This belief is supported by output, by profit, and by the public image of progress. That image is still powerful in the early 1920s. People speak about cars like they speak about freedom. Roads expand, cities spread, and the promise of mobility becomes part of American identity. Ford is praised as a builder of the future. Many outside observers do not see the cost because the final product looks clean. A finished car does not show the sweat that made it. The famous wage policy, the $5 day, is still part of Ford's identity during this time. It draws workers in large numbers, and it helps reduce turnover, at least for a while. Yet the wage is not simply a gift. It is tied to a larger system of control that becomes sharper with each year. Ford wants not only labor, he wants order. This is where the sociological department becomes central to the story. It is not just a side program or a public relations trick. It acts like an extension of the factory, reaching beyond the gate into streets, homes, and personal routines. The department's logic is simple in theory. A stable private life produces a stable work life, and stability produces efficiency. If the company can shape the worker's life, then the company can protect the system. Inspectors visit workers' homes, sometimes without warning. They observe cleanliness, sleeping arrangements, and how money appears to be used. They look for signs of drinking, gambling, and other behaviors management considers harmful. They ask about family structure and daily habits. They may offer advice, but the advice carries weight because it is connected to wages and continued employment. For management, this system can feel practical and even moral. In an era when many workers are migrants or new arrivals, the company claims it is helping families adjust to modern industrial life. It frames oversight as guidance. It claims to protect workers from waste and disorder. The language can sound supportive, but the power relationship is clear, and workers understand it. For workers, the home is supposed to be a private place, but under this system it becomes a space of evaluation. Privacy feels conditional. Even those who follow the rules can feel watched, because the visits create a constant fear of being judged. A worker may not know which neighbor reports to whom, or which small detail can be used as a reason to cut pay. The sense of surveillance does not end, it simply shifts locations. This changes behavior in subtle ways that build into larger tension. People become cautious about what they say at work, and also cautious about what they say at home. They may avoid gatherings that could be misunderstood. They may hide personal choices that are harmless, but could be labeled improper. They may stop trusting coworkers, because a coworker could be an informant, or could simply repeat a story that turns into a report. The system also creates a feeling of humiliation for some. Being inspected can feel like being treated as a child rather than an adult. It suggests that a worker cannot be trusted to manage life without corporate guidance. Over time, this can produce anger that stays quiet but does not disappear. A person may smile and comply, yet inside they feel smaller, and that feeling does not fade easily. While workers live under this pressure, Fairlane exists as the opposite experience. Inside the mansion, the same ideas of system and efficiency produce comfort instead of stress. Technology removes friction. Heating, lighting, and water flow smoothly. The house is maintained by staff who understand their roles and move quietly through routines. Everything is prepared, measured, and controlled, but for the owner, it feels like ease. This contrast matters because it shapes how Ford experiences his own philosophy. At Fairlane, control is invisible and pleasant. It is like a well-tuned engine that never sputters. When Ford looks out from this environment, it is easier to believe that control is a form of care. It is harder to feel how control can become pressure when applied to people who have little choice. In boardrooms and reports, human struggle is reduced to categories: attendance, productivity, injury rates, turnover. These numbers can show patterns, but they do not show the taste of metal dust in the mouth, or the way a shoulder burns after 8 hours, or the fear of an unexpected inspection. When decision-making relies on abstraction, it can become colder without anyone meaning it to. As the 1920s move forward, the American labor movement grows stronger in many industries. Organizers gain experience. Unions spread, and workers begin to compare conditions across companies. At some firms, negotiation becomes normal. At Ford, resistance to unions remains intense. Ford distrusts collective bargaining because he believes it introduces conflict into a system that depends on smooth flow. This refusal creates a special kind of pressure. Without negotiation, the only way for workers to express grievances becomes quiet resistance, or public confrontation. Quiet resistance begins small. People slow down slightly when they can. They take longer to recover between motions. They call in sick more often. They make mistakes that force brief pauses. Sometimes these acts are intentional, sometimes they are simply the result of fatigue. Either way, they disrupt the dream of perfect efficiency. Management responds by tightening oversight inside the factory as well. Supervisors watch more closely. Time studies become more frequent. Rules are enforced with less flexibility. The atmosphere becomes tense. The factory floor stops feeling like a place of shared purpose and starts feeling like a place of constant testing. Workers sense that they are being measured not only by output, but by attitude. Fear and resentment begin to feed each other. When workers feel watched, they hide feelings. When feelings are hidden, trust fades. When trust fades, rumors grow. Rumors increase anxiety. Anxiety makes the workplace feel unstable, and instability triggers management to increase control. The loop strengthens over time, and it does not need a single dramatic event to become dangerous. This period also creates a psychological split in how people experience Ford's brand. To the public, Ford stands for modern life, affordable cars, and industrial genius. To many workers, Ford stands for rigid discipline, surveillance, and the feeling that life is being managed by someone else. Both images are true in their own way, and the contradiction becomes part of the company's identity. Newspaper stories and reform voices begin to describe the darker side of the system more openly. Some writers focus on the home inspections and the moral judgment. Others focus on the intense pace of the line. These stories do not always reach everyone, and some are softened by praise of Ford's wages, but they build a record that cannot be erased. The public image starts to develop shadows. Ford's reaction is not to soften, but to defend. He believes critics fail to understand what he is building. He believes interference threatens progress. He sees himself as protecting a system that benefits society, even if some individuals struggle within it. This is a common logic among builders of large systems. The system becomes the moral center, and individual discomfort becomes secondary. Fairlane continues to support this mindset. It is built to be stable and predictable. It filters out noise. It turns complexity into comfort. The estate's calm can make outside conflict feel distant and less urgent. This is not because Ford is unaware of conflict, but because the environment shapes how conflict feels. A crisis feels different when viewed from a quiet room than when experienced on a factory line. As the decade nears its end, wider economic signals begin to shift. Markets become unstable, and the sense of endless growth weakens. Workers feel this before it becomes a headline, because job security starts to feel less certain. When people feel replaceable, they become more cautious and more resentful at the same time. Fear makes them comply, resentment makes them remember. The pressure on the factory floor intensifies, because management wants to protect profits in uncertain times. Efficiency becomes even more valuable, so demands increase. The line feels less forgiving. The old idea that hard work leads to stable progress begins to weaken. Workers begin to wonder if discipline only serves the company, not them. Home inspections and behavioral oversight also feel heavier in this climate. When a job is harder to replace, the threat behind an inspection becomes sharper. A worker may accept intrusion when jobs are plentiful, but the same intrusion becomes frightening when jobs are scarce. The company's power grows automatically in a crisis, even if policy does not change. Power is shaped by context. As resentment grows, the idea of collective action becomes more attractive, even if it remains risky. People begin to talk more carefully about organization. They share stories about other workplaces. They imagine the possibility of protection not granted by a company, but demanded by workers. These conversations do not yet dominate the factory, but they spread like a slow current under the surface. This is also the moment when the dream of modern comfort becomes more complicated. The nation celebrates technology, but technology is now clearly tied to discipline. Workers see that modern systems can improve life for some while tightening control over others. The same efficiency that makes cars affordable can also make labor interchangeable. The same planning that makes Fairlane comfortable can also make factory life feel like a cage. The change does not arrive like a storm that everyone can see on the horizon. It arrives like a slow shift in pressure, the kind that makes doors stick, makes conversations shorter, and makes people glance at clocks more often. By the early 1930s, the world around Henry Ford starts to move in ways that his methods cannot fully command. For years, discipline has been the answer to nearly everything: the pace of the line, the rules of the workplace, the inspections of private life, the belief that order creates stability. Now the Great Depression spreads across the country, and stability becomes the one thing no system can promise. In the factories, the first signs appear in the quiet spaces, the gaps between shipments, the pause before a supervisor speaks, the way finished cars sit longer than they should. The assembly line still exists, but it feels less confident. It moves and stops, like a machine that is still strong, but no longer sure it will be fed. Workers notice before anyone admits it. They notice the shorter shifts. They notice departments that close without explanation. They notice when a friend does not come back after lunch because his badge no longer works at the gate. For a long time, Ford's plants had been magnets. Men traveled from other states and other countries because the pay was better and the name carried weight. In the Depression, that magnet becomes something else. It becomes a trap for those who already depend on it, and a mirage for those who stand outside hoping to get in. Detroit's streets fill with people looking for work. The city feels like it is holding its breath. Storefronts darken. Rent becomes overdue. Families stretch food and call it a meal. Inside the factory, fear changes the way work feels. Earlier, the line was hard, but many workers believed the struggle would lead to steady progress. In the Depression, the same line feels like a test that might end at any moment, no matter how well a person performs. Discipline no longer feels like a bargain, it feels like a requirement that offers no guarantee. Workers still arrive early, still move fast, still try not to draw attention, but the emotional balance shifts. The question becomes simple and brutal. If obedience cannot protect a job, then what is obedience worth? In this climate, Ford's system of oversight grows heavier. Home inspections and moral monitoring had already created tension in better times, but during a crisis they take on a sharper edge. When jobs are plentiful, a worker can imagine leaving if the intrusion becomes too much. When jobs vanish, leaving is not a choice. The same inspection that once felt annoying now feels like a threat hanging over a family's survival. A report can mean reduced wages. A report can mean dismissal. A report can mean the end of rent money, the end of heat in winter, the end of dignity in a neighborhood where everyone is already struggling. Ford, surrounded by the calm order of Fair Lane, reads the moment differently. He has always believed that stability comes from discipline. And he believes that crisis is proof that discipline must be stronger, not softer. In his mind, economic chaos is another form of disorder. And disorder must be corrected. This is the danger of a system built around control. When pressure rises, the first instinct is to tighten the grip. It feels logical from above, because tightening has worked before. It feels harmful from below, because it turns fear into suffocation. Fairlane itself becomes more than a home during these years. It becomes a symbol, even if Ford does not want it to be one. The mansion still runs like a well-kept machine. Heat moves through hidden pipes, lights glow without flicker, water flows clean and steady, the gardens remain trimmed, the paths remain clear. The river moves past the windows with the same calm rhythm it always had. Nothing inside the estate suggests collapse. This steady comfort is not a crime, but in a time of mass suffering, it becomes a provocation. People do not only see wealth, they see insulation. They see protection from consequences. The contrast becomes sharper the more the city struggles. In Detroit, a family might burn scraps of wood to keep one room warm. At Fair Lane, warmth is regulated quietly, almost invisibly. In working neighborhoods, food is stretched and watered down. At Fair Lane, meals arrive with regularity. In the streets, men stand in lines for bread, waiting with hats pulled low, faces tired, eyes fixed on the ground. At Fair Lane, the household routine continues, protected by staff and distance. The mansion begins to feel like a separate country sitting inside the same geography. Public opinion shifts in this atmosphere. In earlier years, people could look at Ford and see a symbol of modern progress. The man who made cars affordable, the man who paid higher wages, the man who built the future. In the Depression, the mood hardens. People become less interested in myths and more interested in power. They start asking different questions. Who controls work? Who controls wages? Who controls the rules? Who benefits when everything goes well, and who pays when everything goes wrong? This is when scrutiny grows louder, and not only from labor organizers. Journalists begin to write with sharper edges. Reformers speak with urgency. Politicians look for ways to respond to public anger. The era is full of arguments about responsibility. Some people defend industrial leaders as builders. Others describe them as rulers. Ford's refusal to compromise becomes a focal point because it fits the mood of conflict. A nation in pain becomes less willing to accept private authority that answers only to itself. Ford does not change his core view. He distrusts unions, seeing them as machines of disruption. He distrusts government intervention, seeing it as interference by people who do not understand production. He distrusts critics, seeing them as outsiders who mistake discipline for cruelty. These beliefs are not new, but the depression gives them a harder edge. When the world feels unstable, Ford's instinct is to preserve order, and in his mind, order means control. Inside the company, enforcement becomes more visible. Security presence increases. Guards near entrances become a normal part of the scene. Workers notice who is watching, who is taking notes, who is listening. The factory gate feels less like an entry into employment and more like a checkpoint. When people feel watched, they become careful. When they become careful, they stop speaking freely. When they stop speaking freely, resentment has room to grow without release. At the same time, labor movements gain momentum across the country. In many industries, unions grow because desperation removes fear. A person with nothing to lose becomes willing to take risks. The depression creates millions of such people. At Ford plants, the risk remains intense, but the pressure that pushes workers toward organization grows stronger. They begin to compare experiences. They begin to share stories about inspections, dismissals, pace, injuries, and intimidation. They begin to see that individual discipline cannot solve collective vulnerability. This is where the story becomes cinematic in a different way. The tension stops being only personal and becomes public. Meetings happen in crowded rooms and quiet basements. Men speak in low voices at first, then louder as the idea takes hold. People enter and exit cautiously, watching the street. The atmosphere feels like planning rather than complaining. It feels like preparation. The company responds with equal seriousness. Ford's leadership believes union activity threatens the entire system. It threatens the pace of production, the authority of management, and the belief that the company can shape the worker without negotiation. To defend the system, they rely on security, surveillance, and pressure. This creates a cycle. Organization grows because fear is high. Surveillance grows because organization is high. Each side sees the other as proof of danger. Fair Lane, in this period, feels like the quiet eye of a storm. It is not a place where shouting matches occur. It is a place where decisions harden. The house does not generate conflict directly, but it supports the mindset that conflict is an outside disturbance rather than a sign of internal imbalance. In that sense, it becomes part of the mechanism. It provides calm that can make harsher decisions feel reasonable. Inside the mansion, Ford's life continues with routines that suggest control is still possible. He moves through rooms designed for comfort and privacy. He can step into a quiet study and feel the stability of thick walls. He can look at the river and feel time moving smoothly. This sensory environment matters. It shapes how pressure is processed. A crisis looks different when seen from a stable platform. It is easier to believe the world is overreacting when the immediate world is quiet. Yet outside, the crisis becomes impossible to keep out of view. Unemployment and hardship create a raw political atmosphere. The country debates the role of government and the rights of workers with intensity. New laws and new expectations begin to form. The idea that private power should face public accountability spreads. Even companies that once operated with near total freedom begin to encounter limits. Ford resists this shift, but the pressure does not disappear. It grows and changes shape. Courts become involved, investigations occur, the public looks for evidence. Stories of conflict and intimidation do not remain private. They appear in photographs and headlines. The image of the efficient industrial leader begins to share space with another image, the image of a man defending control with force. This is also the point where the meaning of efficiency changes. Earlier, efficiency could be celebrated as a neutral good: faster production, cheaper cars, more jobs. In the Depression, efficiency can look cold. It can look like cutting people loose when demand falls. It can look like treating workers as replaceable parts. It can look like using surveillance to keep people obedient when they have no alternative. The same concept that once inspired admiration now invites moral questions. Inside the factories, the emotional temperature rises. Workers feel that management does not see them as partners, only as elements to be managed. When people feel reduced in this way, they often respond with anger, but the anger can take time to show itself. It first appears as tension, as silence, as hardened faces on the line, as eyes that do not meet a supervisor's gaze. It appears as exhaustion that feels personal, but is actually structural. The company tries to maintain productivity through fear and strictness. But fear has limits. Fear can make a person comply, but it also makes a person hate. Hate does not always explode immediately, but it stays. It accumulates. It waits for a moment when it can be expressed openly. At the same time, Ford's internal circle becomes more insulated. People who challenge his beliefs are less welcome. Loyalty is valued more than disagreement. This matters because crisis demands adaptation. And adaptation requires honest feedback. When feedback is filtered, leaders can become more confident and less accurate. Fairlane, as a controlled environment, supports this insulation. It provides comfort that can make dissent feel unnecessary. As the mid-1930s approach, the conflict is no longer just about pay or schedules. It is about dignity and authority. Workers want protections not granted by a company's goodwill. They want rights that do not depend on approval. They want a voice that cannot be removed by an inspector's report. Management wants to preserve a system where authority is centralized and where negotiation is seen as disruption. These goals collide. The public watches more closely now. In earlier years, many people might have ignored factory conflict as an internal matter. In the Depression, nothing feels internal. Everything feels connected. When millions suffer, the actions of powerful companies feel like national issues. Ford becomes part of a larger debate about wealth and responsibility. Fairlane becomes part of that debate as well, because it is the physical evidence of how far wealth can separate one life from another. By the mid-1930s, the tension surrounding Ford Motor Company no longer hides in private conversations or internal reports. It moves fully into public view, where it cannot be softened or reframed by discipline or silence. What once felt like a controlled struggle inside factories now becomes a national story about power, labor, and resistance. The system that built Fairlane reaches the moment where it must face the consequences of its own rigidity. Inside the factories, the atmosphere is heavy and unstable. Workers arrive with the same habits they have learned over years, arriving early, moving quickly, avoiding attention. Yet the emotional core of the routine has changed. The belief that hard work will protect a future no longer feels true. Obedience feels hollow. Every shift carries the awareness that dismissal can arrive without warning, regardless of loyalty or effort. The assembly line still moves, but it no longer feels like progress. It feels like pressure. Each motion is watched. Each pause is noticed. Supervisors enforce rules with less flexibility than before. Where there was once pride in speed and precision, there is now tension and restraint. Workers focus not on doing well, but on avoiding mistakes that could draw scrutiny. This environment creates a strange contradiction. Productivity may remain high, but morale collapses. People do what is required, but they no longer believe in the system that demands it. The factory becomes a place of endurance rather than purpose. Silence spreads not because workers agree, but because speaking feels dangerous. Outside the factory gates, the mood is different. Workers begin to gather in ways they had avoided before. Desperation changes calculation. When fear becomes constant, it loses its power to control behavior. People start talking openly about organization, about collective protection, about demanding rights that cannot be withdrawn by management. The idea of standing together begins to feel less dangerous than standing alone. Labor organizers recognize this shift immediately. They understand that moments of crisis open doors that discipline keeps closed in stable times. They listen, they document stories, and they offer language to feelings workers already carry. The message spreads slowly but steadily. It does not promise comfort, it promises voice. Ford's leadership sees this movement as an existential threat. Unionization challenges everything the system is built upon. It threatens the authority of management. It threatens the belief that efficiency must remain centralized. It threatens the idea that order can be imposed rather than negotiated. To Ford, this threat is not abstract. It feels personal because the system reflects his beliefs. The company responds by reinforcing security and surveillance. Guards become a common sight. Gates feel heavier, more symbolic. Workers sense that they are being watched even when nothing happens. Informants and rumors circulate. Trust inside the workforce continues to erode, but fear no longer produces compliance as easily as before. Public confrontations begin to occur. They are not accidents. They are the visible result of pressure that has been building for years. When workers attempt to distribute information or organize openly, they are met with force. These moments draw attention far beyond Detroit. Photographs capture clashes, newspapers publish accounts. What was once hidden becomes undeniable. These images damage Ford's public reputation deeply. For years, he was praised as a builder and innovator. Now he is increasingly described as a man defending control through intimidation. The contrast between his public image and private methods becomes too sharp to ignore. Supporters struggle to reconcile progress with violence. Critics find clear evidence for long-standing accusations. Fairlane stands silently during these events. It does not react. It does not change. Its calm becomes part of the story whether Ford intends it or not. The mansion appears untouched by conflict, and that appearance itself becomes symbolic. It suggests separation from consequences, insulation from accountability, and distance from lived struggle. Inside Fairlane, Ford remains convinced that he is defending order. He believes that yielding to unions would weaken production and invite chaos. He sees compromise as the first step toward collapse. His belief is reinforced by the mansion's continued perfection. The house still works, the systems still function. Nothing inside suggests failure. This is the danger of control without feedback. When a system protects its leader from discomfort, it can also protect beliefs from correction. Fairlane offers Ford a space where opposition feels external and unreasonable. It becomes easier to view conflict as an attack rather than a message. Meanwhile, the broader world moves in a different direction. Government attention intensifies. Labor rights become a national issue. New laws and expectations reshape the relationship between workers and employers across industries. The idea that private authority should remain unchecked loses legitimacy. Even companies that once resisted change begin to adapt. Ford resists longer than most. His refusal becomes part of his identity. He frames it as principle rather than stubbornness. Yet resistance has costs. The company's internal cohesion weakens. Legal pressure increases. Public trust declines. What was once a symbol of modern efficiency becomes a focal point of controversy. Within the workforce, the emotional shift is profound. Workers no longer see management as distant but benevolent. They see it as adversarial. This changes how people relate to their work. Pride fades. Loyalty dissolves. The job becomes a transaction rather than a calling. When people stop believing in a system, they stop protecting it. Fairlane's meaning continues to change in public imagination. It is no longer simply a home. It is a monument to a philosophy that values order over negotiation, efficiency over empathy, control over consent. The mansion's elegance now feels severe rather than inspiring. As pressure mounts, the company begins to change despite Ford's resistance. Authority gradually shifts to others within the organization. Decisions are filtered through legal and political reality. Some compromises are made, not because they are welcomed, but because they become unavoidable. The system adapts even as its founder resists adaptation. This period marks the beginning of Ford's declining influence. He remains powerful, but no longer absolute. The world he built continues to function, but it does so under new constraints. Discipline alone is no longer enough. Negotiation, regulation, and accountability begin to reshape industrial life. For Ford, this feels like loss rather than progress. He does not celebrate the new balance. He sees it as dilution of authority. Fairlane becomes a refuge where his worldview remains intact, even as it loses relevance outside its walls. Workers gain protections that once seemed impossible. The right to organize becomes real. Oversight moves away from private surveillance toward public standards. The power imbalance narrows, though it does not disappear. The system becomes more human, but also more complex. In the last stretch of Henry Ford's life, the world he once shaped with a firm hand keeps moving, but it no longer moves in a way that answers only to him. The factories remain, the machines remain, and the habits of mass production remain, yet the feeling of absolute control begins to fade. Fairlane still sits beside the Rouge River with the calm confidence of a finished monument. The estate looks the same, sounds the same, and runs the same, but its meaning starts to change. By the early 1940s, Ford is no longer the daily force that sets every direction. Age and distance pull him away from constant oversight, but the deeper reason is scale. The company has grown too large for personal rule to function the way it did in earlier years. Decisions move through managers, legal teams, and public expectations. Authority becomes something shared, sometimes argued over, sometimes negotiated, and often shaped by forces Ford cannot fully command. Inside Fairlane, the shift is not dramatic, but it is present. The house continues to run like a well-tuned system, with heat controlled quietly, lights stable, and water flowing with steady pressure. Rooms remain orderly and routines stay predictable. Yet the mansion begins to feel less like a command center and more like a sanctuary. It becomes a place where Ford's worldview can still feel complete, even when the outside world no longer agrees with it. The contrast between Fairlane and the broader society grows sharper in these years. Outside, the nation is changing through hardship and conflict, then through wartime mobilization, and later through the demands of a new social order. Workers have more organized power than before. Government regulation is stronger. The public expects large companies to answer questions that once were dismissed. The world Ford built now carries rules that do not come from his personal discipline, but from law, politics, and public pressure. Ford does not embrace these changes. He has never trusted outside interference. He sees regulation as a threat to efficiency and sees negotiation as a leak in the machinery of progress. From his perspective, authority must remain firm to keep production stable. Fairlane supports that belief because it still proves that control can create comfort. The mansion is a daily reminder that systems work best when one hand guides them. But the problem is that the outside world is no longer a private workshop where one mind can set the terms. It is a nation that has learned the danger of unchecked power, not only in business, but in politics and war. The Depression taught people that markets do not protect everyone. The labor conflicts taught people that discipline can become domination. These lessons shift the public mood, and that mood reshapes industry whether Ford likes it or not. During the war years, production surges again, but under a different moral atmosphere. Factories run at high output, yet they do so under new expectations. The state demands results, but it also demands stability. Labor is treated as essential, not disposable. There is pressure to avoid disruptions because the stakes feel national. In this environment, even a company like Ford Motor Company must operate inside a larger framework. The old belief that private authority should be enough loses ground. This creates a strange tension around Ford's legacy while he is still alive. The world still respects his achievements, but it does not always respect his methods. People can admire the assembly line and still criticize the way it was enforced. They can praise affordable cars and still question the cost paid by workers. Fairlane becomes a quiet symbol of this tension because it is the physical proof of what success looked like at the top. Inside the mansion, the sensory world remains soothing and controlled. Floors feel solid underfoot. Air feels stable, neither too cold nor too warm. Light does not flicker. Sound stays soft. These details matter because they shape how a person experiences reality. A calm environment makes conflict feel distant, even when conflict is shaping the world outside. It can make a leader feel that the system is still correct, even when the system is being rewritten. Ford's inner circle also changes as these years pass. Some people around him learn to adapt to the new reality, because survival now depends on adaptation. Others remain loyal to the old vision and treat change as a betrayal. This creates a quieter conflict inside leadership, not always spoken aloud, but visible in decisions, in delays, and in cautious language. Fairlane becomes the place where the old certainty still feels strongest, because it was built for certainty. At the same time, workers across the country experience a shift in what they believe is possible. They have seen collective action succeed in places where it once seemed impossible. They have watched laws develop that recognize rights, and they have learned that power can be contested. This does not create a perfect world for labor, but it changes the emotional balance. Workers feel less alone. They feel less trapped. That change alone reshapes the industrial landscape. When Ford's health declines further, his connection to daily operations becomes more symbolic. His name still carries weight, but the company's future depends on structures larger than any individual. The industrial age is entering a phase where institutions matter more than founders. That shift is part of modernity itself, and Ford helped create it, even if he does not like what it means for personal authority. Fairlane begins to carry a heavier atmosphere because of this. Not heavier in sound or light, since the mansion remains calm, but heavier in meaning. It starts to feel like a preserved world, a place that holds the logic of an earlier era. It holds the belief that efficiency is not just a tool, but a moral rule. It holds the belief that order must come from above. It holds the belief that society runs best when it is managed like a machine. Then Ford dies in the late 1940s, and the world is forced to describe him in full. Obituaries and public statements often begin with the great achievements: the assembly line, the transformation of manufacturing, the shift in transportation, the scale of economic impact. These facts are real and cannot be erased. Millions live different lives because of what Ford made possible, and that kind of change leaves a permanent mark. Yet the darker parts are also present in the record by this time. The story of surveillance, intimidation, and rigid control is no longer something whispered only by workers. It is discussed openly by journalists, historians, and the public. People are not only asking what Ford built, but how he built it, and what he believed he had the right to control. In this way, the legacy becomes complicated, and Fairlane becomes a physical stage where those complications can be felt. After his death, the mansion's role changes again. It is no longer the private space of a living ruler. It becomes an artifact, a place that can be entered, studied, and interpreted. Visitors walk into rooms designed for comfort and control. They see advanced technology for its time, systems that reduced friction and made daily life feel smooth. They can admire the ingenuity, because ingenuity is visible in pipes, wiring, and planning. But visitors can also feel something else: the sense that the house is a shield. It was built to keep disorder out and keep comfort in. It was built to separate one life from the chaos and pressure that surrounded industrial labor. That separation is not an accident. It is the point. Fairlane is the architecture of distance. It is distance made solid. The mansion's silence becomes part of the story. It is a silence that can feel peaceful at first, but then it can feel unsettling. It reminds visitors that this calm is not universal. It is selected. It is purchased. It is protected. The house suggests that a controlled world is possible, but it also suggests that such a world is often possible only for those who control resources and rules. Historians argue about what Fairlane represents, and the arguments rarely end cleanly because the mansion carries multiple truths at once. It can be a triumph of modern design and domestic innovation. It can also be a symbol of inequality and a warning about power. It can be both without contradiction, because Ford's life contained both without contradiction in his own mind. Some historians focus on the technological side, seeing Fairlane as a demonstration of early modern living, the kind of integrated comfort that would later become normal for many people. From that angle, the mansion is a laboratory, a place where ideas about climate control, electricity, and household systems were used at a high level. It shows how quickly wealth can accelerate technological adoption, turning future concepts into present reality. Other historians focus on the social side, seeing the mansion as a monument built from a system that demanded strict obedience from workers. From that angle, Fairlane is not only a home, it is the reward structure of industrial power. It represents how wealth concentrates, how control spreads beyond the workplace, and how leaders can justify intrusion as stability. This interpretation also has evidence, because the company's oversight policies were real, and the labor conflicts were real. The most unsettling truth is that Fairlane makes control feel beautiful. It makes management feel smooth. It hides the strain that made the smoothness possible. That is why the mansion is such a strong symbol. It shows how power can present itself as comfort and progress. It shows how easily people can admire the outcome while missing the cost. The river outside continues to move through all these debates. Seasons pass and the estate remains. The endurance of the mansion itself becomes part of its message. It survives because it was built with confidence and resources. It survives because wealth can create structures that last longer than the systems that produced them. The house becomes a durable container for memory, and memory is where legacy is fought over. Fairlane also forces a larger question about the industrial age. When a system is designed for efficiency, what happens to human complexity inside that system? Machines do not need dignity, but people do. Machines do not need privacy, but people do. Machines can be replaced without grief, but people cannot. Ford's genius was in treating production like a controllable flow. His flaw, at least in the eyes of many, was in extending that mindset too far into human life. This is where the shadow of Fairlane reaches into the present. The story is not only about one man and one mansion, it is about a pattern that repeats in new forms. Modern workplaces still track performance, still measure time, still collect data, and still test the boundary between guidance and surveillance. The technology is different, but the moral question is similar. When does efficiency become a justification for control that harms the people who make the system run? Standing inside Fairlane, it is possible to feel admiration and discomfort at the same time. Admiration for the clarity of design, the confidence of construction, and the promise of modern comfort. Discomfort at the realization that this comfort was never only about technology. It was about power. And power always creates a gap between those who command and those who obey. That gap is the hidden story behind the mansion world. It is hidden not because it was secret, but because it was normalized. Control was framed as care. Discipline was framed as progress. Efficiency was framed as morality. The mansion reflects those frames in brick, stone, and quiet systems that do not ask questions. People are the ones who ask questions, and people are the ones who carry the cost. In the end, Fairlane does not give a simple verdict. It does not declare Ford a hero or a villain in a clean way. It holds the contradictions without resolving them. It shows how progress can be real and still be troubling. It shows how innovation can expand freedom for many people and still depend on control over others. It shows how wealth can build comfort while also building distance. This is why the story ends in reflection rather than triumph. Fairlane stands beside the river, calm and intact, long after the era of absolute personal authority has passed. The mansion remains a monument to what control can achieve, and a reminder of what control can cost. The shadow that remains is not just Ford's shadow, it is the shadow of a belief that a society can be improved by managing people like machines. The house endures as a question carved into space. How much control is acceptable, and who pays when the answer is decided from the quiet side of the gate?